Welcome everybody. So I am back and bringing you guys a special Netflix movie review. This is going to be for the Netflix film Extraction. So if you see an image of Extraction behind me, that is the movie that we're going to be discussing. This movie stars Chris Hemsworth as well as David Harbour in the film. This is directed by Sam Hargrave, and this is actually his directorial debut. So previously he had pretty much been sort of a stunt coordinator working for the Russo brothers on things like Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, sort of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, and I think this is a really interesting take on sort of the action genre. This feels a lot inspired by films like John Wick. In the beginning of this movie, you see Tyler Rake. He's pretty much a mercenary, and he's pretty much at a death in the family. He has lost his son at a really early age, and I think that really does haunt him. I'm a really huge sucker for movies like this, which deals a little bit on the topic of fathers and sons and kind of how a father would handle the loss of their son, especially in a really tragic event such as losing their son at a really young age. I don't think that's something that any sort of father should have to deal with, and personally speaking, I think that the way that Tyler handles this is really sort of detrimental to his own self. He's pretty much drinking a lot. He's having sort of flashbacks of his family and sort of what his family meant to him and things that really anybody would be dealing with in this sort of situation, while also kind of targeting this mob boss's family. He has to get this child to safety in India, as well as having to deal with some of the bad guys that are also chasing after him as well. This movie does a lot of things that are really John Wick inspired in terms of the one shot, especially during the action sequences. This also feels kind of like 1917 in that respect as well. And I think I haven't seen sort of action sequences this great in a movie since the John Wick franchise, just because of the fact that these do feel sort of like they're inspired by that sort of action style or something like Uncharted. This movie is set in India, so it's a little bit more of a globe-trotting sort of extravaganza. I really do like the fact that they chose to do this movie in sort of India and sort of a different sort of setting entirely. I think it's a really good change of pace for once. I really do think that this movie feels a little bit hot, feels a little bit warm due to sort of the color grading, as well as the fact where it's shot. If you look at this movie feels a little bit more color graded to be a little bit more yellow. There's a little bit of a tint of yellow throughout most of this film, and there's even a spot that takes place in Australia, which I really do think is pretty cool. You get sort of the backstory between Tyler Rake and what he's going through with his family, as well as seeing sort of his normal everyday life. It really does have a huge impact on the Netflix style of filming, because previously Netflix films have felt sort of like a different style of filmmaking altogether, and I really do view Netflix movies differently than how I would view a cinematic approach to this in a movie that's pretty much put in theaters. But this movie kind of blends that whole kind of style, and I think that it's really cool to kind of see that being brought to a Netflix film. I think this is one of Netflix's more perfect films because of the way that the action is shot, the way that this is a simplistic sort of story where Tyler has to get this kid from one end of India to the next while he's being pretty much chased left and right. The action sequences of this film are really well shot, and I think that the stunt team really has a part to play in that, because he is really working with people that he has worked with in the past, and I think that the use of practical as opposed to CGI in terms of the actions and the fight sequences and stuff in this movie is really cool. There's a lot of blood and gore and stuff like that, so this is definitely not one of those family movies. This is pretty much a hard R rating, and a lot of these movies nowadays would kind of stray away from that hard R rating, even if they do have sort of an R rating themselves. Some of these movies don't feel like they've earned or justified the R rating, but this movie definitely does. With some of these sequences that happen in this movie where Tyler just slams a door into the guy's arm and smacks him in the face with it, or when he's firing off rounds and blood just splattering all over the walls and stuff like that, you kind of feel it. You kind of feel the gut punch, especially sequences where one of these mercenary guys, where you think at first he's sort of the bad guy kind of hunting down Tyler, and he actually becomes sort of the good guy at the end, and he's kind of helping rescue the son from this bridge. The action sequences that feel brutal, especially when he kind of goes after one of the special forces soldiers that's kind of hunting him down with a knife, and he's just going away at the guy with the knife, and it feels kind of like something out of a horror movie where you see blood and guts and stuff like that from the different soldiers that he's stabbing. At the same time, he's using the guy as a meat shield as the other guy's trying to fire at him. It's really cool action sequence like that I think are going to be really memorable. I think that people that are watching this movie are really going to have something that they're going to be able to watch and study for years to come, and I think this is one of those movies that's going to have a lot of rewatchability factor to it. That's one of the things that I look for in sort of a movie, even in a cinematic movie approach, is whether or not that this movie has legs, whether or not it's going to do well over time, decades and decades later after sort of our generation is gone. I think this is one of those movies that really does have that really does have that thing that where you watch it, you find something new every time. I really do think that this movie definitely deserves a B+ rating. It's not really as perfect as everybody's saying, but it's definitely not as bad as some of the other Netflix films, and there's a part in this movie that kind of slows down a little bit halfway into the film in the second act, where you kind of get a little bit more of a backstory between who Tyler is and who sort of he was previously. This kid kind of looks up to him as a hero and as someone that's really brave, and he kind of even mentions that in this movie, and Tyler's like, I'm not brave, I'm just pretty much doing sort of my job, and I'm doing what I have to in order to survive, and this kid kind of looks up to him sort of as a hero. This is a really different approach to what Chris Hemsworth is used to dealing with. Chris Hemsworth has done military things in the past, like 12 Strong, which is a movie I definitely want to kind of review in the future. He's done things like Men in Black and sort of the whole Ghostbusters thing, which I'm not really a fan of the Ghostbusters 2016 just because of the fact that they made Chris look like a fool. But you kind of buy Chris Hemsworth as this mercenary soldier that's kind of got a death wish. You kind of buy a military soldier that has a hero's journey moment where at first all he wants to do is try and get over the death of his son. He's pretty much haunted by it, and then over time you kind of gradually see him become sort of the soldier that he's kind of meant to be, and the fact that he kind of views this kid as his own son. He kind of sees similar aspects of himself in this kid. I think that's eventually why he kind of comes around to helping him out, just because this kid is a high value target. This kid is something that all these guys are coming after because there's a high bounty on this kid's head. And I think that later on he kind of does the right thing just because it's within his heart. And that's kind of one of those sequences where you see Tyler Rake, he kind of goes to David Harbour's safe house in this movie. David Harbour is from Stranger Things, and he kind of shows up. He's kind of like this ex sort of military mercenary, and he's pretty much trying to protect his family, and he kind of helps out Tyler just because of the fact that he is his friend and that Tyler kind of needs a place to stay so that he can kind of hide out as these people are looking for him. Eventually kind of tells Tyler the plan that he's going to have in order to kind of kill this kid, and Tyler's like, what do you want me to do, just to go up there and shoot this kid while he's sleeping? Like, this is something that Tyler is not going to do because he has lost his own kid to a disease that has really been the detriment of himself, like I said before. And he kind of gets the hint that David Harbour pretty much intends to shoot this kid with a Glock, and eventually he kind of does make his way up the steps, and that's where you get this sort of really cool fight sequence between David Harbour and sort of Chris Hemsworth, and they're against each other on the floor like a wrestling style, and sort of the moves that they're doing and stuff like that in this fight sequence. And it's really well choreographed, it's really well shot. Everything in this movie really does feel brutal and bleak and dirty, really hot. Like, if you're watching this in the summer, you're really gonna have that realistic effect to it. And I think this is one of those movies that really does have that deep emotional impact, especially towards the end of the film, where you kind of get that bridge sequence where Tyler's just pretty much taking out fools left and right, along with that mercenary soldier who's pretty much helping out. And this guy kind of feels like Solid Snake at some points because he's wearing sort of this hood and stuff like that, and he eventually goes on sort of a killing spree, sort of like what John Wick does in the movies. He's kind of putting the weapon towards the guy's chest at one point in time and firing off rounds as he's kind of reloading the weapon and kind of putting in new rounds. It's really cool, intriguing sort of action sequences like that are in this movie that really does drive the movie forward. There's some sequences that feel like they're a little bit too long, but in a movie such as this, where it's only like an hour and a half, I don't think that you're gonna find yourself bored at any point in time. I certainly didn't. There were instances where it was kind of hard to hear what some of the actors were saying. I really like the fact that this movie does go to Australia at one point. Like I said before, you get that really cool sequence where you see Chris leaping off sort of the edge of a cliff and kind of into the water, and then he sits there and is meditating underneath the water, like a Jedi would in sort of the Phantom Menace, where you get Qui-Gon Jinn who's meditating before a fight. Then you cut back to some of the action sequences and stuff that are happening in this movie, and I just think for the action movie fan that you're going to really enjoy this movie. And without spoiling a lot of stuff that happens in this film, without spoiling the ending and what happens to Tyler, I really do want to say that this movie definitely earns that B+ rating. It's not a perfect movie by any means, but it's definitely not a really bad movie. I think that Chris Hemsworth does something that he's really not used to in these movies. He's really good in terms of comedy. He's also really good in sort of the superhero action genre, and I really do think that he has this ability to kind of make people believe that he is sort of this mercenary soldier, and I think that really helps in a movie like this. I know that originally they were trying to get sort of like an everyman, like John McClane or somebody that could kind of fit this role and who wasn't sort of a muscle-bound Norse godlike person for this film, but I'm really happy that Sam Hargrave kind of took it upon himself to have Chris Hemsworth come into this picture. I know a lot of people are thinking that this is a Anthony and Joe Russo movie just because of the fact that they did help produce this movie, but this is really a Sam Hargrave directorial debut, and I think that he does a really good job in this. So as a first debut film, I would really like to see a sequel to this movie. At the end of this movie, you do, spoiler alert, kind of get the hint that maybe Tyler didn't survive this, especially what happens to him on the bridge. But I think that if they did a prequel to this film, or did a logical sense of where he could survive sort of what happened to him and come back for more films, I'd really like to see Chris Hemsworth come back for this. And really hats off to the cast and crew, because they could have went full CGI with this, they could have went full non-practical sets and stuff like that, but they really chose to do the practical sets, the practical action set pieces, and the one-take shots, but they weren't really one takes, they were kind of shot to make it seem like it was that way. And there's one really cool action sequence where they're on the rooftop, they're doing kind of parkour as these bad guys are chasing after them, and you see Chris Hemsworth kind of push the kid onto another building. He kind of leaps over himself, and you see sort of the camera kind of leap over as well. The camera in this film is sort of another personality onto itself, like it's sort of another character, and you kind of get that sequence where it kind of leaps over buildings and stuff like that, and you don't know if it's done, using wires, or like there's another camera operator that was kind of like a stuntman that was kind of going over with them while holding the camera. Like, it was kind of stuff like that that makes me want to see sort of the behind the scenes stuff, makes me want to kind of get a Blu-ray eventually and see kind of how this movie was shot and filmed. But overall, I think this is a really fantastic Netflix movie. I really don't do sort of Netflix movie reviews, so this is really my first. I kind of view them in a different light just because they are sort of lower budget, but I think this movie had a $65 million budget in terms of where they were shooting, in terms of action sequences and how they were shooting those and stuff like that, and I could kind of buy them having a $65 million budget just because, the Russo brothers worked on this. You got sort of one of the stunt coordinators who's now a director that's working on this movie. You got Chris Hemsworth, who's now a producer on this film, and I really do think that Chris Hemsworth put his money where his mouth is, and he helped create sort of a really well-crafted film. I really do think that this is one of those Netflix movies that is really pretty much perfect in every way, even though I gave it sort of a B+. I think that there's room for improvement in terms of sort of where they kind of slow down in the second act to give the audience a rest and to kind of give the backstory between the characters. But overall, I think everybody did a good job. I don't think any of the supporting characters were wasted. I didn't think any of the actors didn't feel like they belonged. I think this is a really well-crafted film, so that's why I'm going to give Extraction a B+. Hopefully you guys like this review. This is something that's a little bit different from what I'm used to. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about the movie industry, and as always guys, if you like this, rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.